discover my homes everywhere. Home is a green hill, home is a wind, blowing a trail far, far away. Home is the knowledge heaven is near. Home's the end of the fray.
It's just wonderful to see all of you again. It's so nice. It's one of the very, very great blessings of Ananda is the deep friendships and sense of spiritual family that is woven together over vast distance and over now quite a vast period of time. Some of you we've known for weeks, some we've known for months, and many we've known for many, many decades. And it's beautiful to see that lovely net of hearts and souls dedicated to God. The four of us this morning, as Devi said, are going to have a tribute to Swami Kriyananda and try to help from our vantage point to not so much understand him, because frankly, none of us are ready to understand him, but at the very least to appreciate him. He really is like a diamond with multiple facets. And we're not talking about one of those little quarter-carat diamonds that you see in the malls. This is the Hope Diamond or something like that. He has incredible accomplishments in this life. And we're going to, throughout the weekend, talk about some of those. This afternoon, they're going to talk about different aspects of things that he has presented. And I don't want to dwell on that now, but I will say that, I have now been on the spiritual path over 45 years. And during that time, I've had a chance to see some of the very great souls that came from India and the great teachers. I've met some very great saints. And if you look at the outward accomplishments of Swamiji, in retrospect, now that we can see him having produced the opus of his entire life, it's absolutely amazing. It's not good, it's not right to make comparisons. I'm simply trying to say that his outward production is like the sum total of all the other teachers that have come. And that's not qualitative, because an outward production is not necessarily the sunum bonum of the value of a person's life. It's more that Swami has come into this life with a great mission. When Master met Swami, soon after that, Master told him, "You have a great work to do." And now that we can look back, he probably said that in 1948 or 49, now that we can look back over all those years, now whatever it is, 65 years, 60 years, we can see what an enormous great work Swami had to do. But as I say, that outward work is not really the essence of it. But I want to also add that very near the end of Master's life, he said to Swamiji, "I want you to know you have pleased me very much." And now that Swami's life is moving into its final phases, I'm sure that statement is going to be reflected when he goes up and joins Master on the astral plane. I'm sure that Master is vibrating to him and to all of us that you have pleased me very much. I want to talk basically not so much about Swamiji in an outer sense or in the facets or in the accomplishments he's done, but I want to talk about the essential nature of his consciousness. If we were to imagine him before he came into this world, which would be 86 years ago tomorrow. So before he came into this world, before he was conceived, so here he is on the astral plane. Just imagine him as a kind of globe of light. We've used the image of a diamond. Think of that diamond now as a diamond-shaped globe of light that is preparing to come into this world for his mission. I say that so that we can get away a little bit from seeing him now at 86, a little bit frail, a little bit not able to walk quite so mobily and so on. We have the image unescapably, because our consciousness goes out, we have the image that that body is Swami. That body is not Swami. That body is a body that he has used for this lifetime, but he's used tens of thousands of other bodies, as have we. And so the body is not him. The events of this life, those aren't him. Nothing outward is him. He is consciousness. Ultimately, he and all of us are nothing except an expression of God's consciousness. We're all God. God sitting here, God talking, God listening, God talking to us through the plants and the trees, although we can't hear them or can't feel them. But everything, the chairs are speaking to us. J.C. Bose was able to show that even metal has consciousness. So the chairs, maybe they're saying, "Ooh, you guys are heavy." Or maybe they're saying, "Oh, thank you. I wanted to be useful." Isn't that kind of our consciousness? More we would say, "Thanks for using me. I wanted to be able to do something useful in this life. I'm shaped like a chair. Let me be a chair. Thanks for using me." But everything in the world, everything is speaking to us. It's that we can't hear it. Well, the great ones come into this world to lift our consciousness so that we can begin to hear those whispers and the intimations. And as we make those connections, even the very subatomic particles are communicating with each other. But we don't hear them, we don't feel them, because we're kind of limited in our consciousness to what we perceive in our senses. And the great ones come to free us from that bondage. And that's really what Swamiji's mission is. He came into this world with this great, great mission, but it wasn't to write books or compose songs or found communities or anything. So I want to talk about basically three aspects of his fundamental consciousness as he incarnated. The first was, and I think this is the most fundamental of all, the first was a search for truth. When he talks about his childhood, he talks about how he was constantly wanting to know. Devi is writing a book about his life, and right now she's on the chapters of his early youth. And in many different ways, the people around him knew that this was a special child. He was different. He wasn't like the others in his family. He wasn't like the others around him. In some cases, he was very serious. In other cases, he was filled with light and joy. He loved beauty. But underneath it all was the search for truth. And when he talks about his relatively early life, growing up, that's what he talks about how he, if you've heard him give a talk in the last couple of years, you probably, or many talks, but you've probably heard some where he talks about, first I looked for truth in science, especially astronomy. Then I looked for it in politics. I looked for it in art. I looked for it in these other ways. But it was the search for truth that was this kind of driving force in him. And then as he got into his later teenage years, or maybe his very early 20s, he began to understand that the search for truth could not be culminated unless we brought God into the picture. And then the search for truth became really the search for God and the search for knowing God. And so in his early 20s, when he had that walk along the beach and realized that God was consciousness, so he broke out of the forms that had been presented to him that had been a kind of a blockage between him and the ability to accept that God was central to life. When he broke out of that, his life broke open. Very quickly, he read the Bhagavad Gita, and soon after that, he found Autobiography of a Yogi, and as soon as he found that, he realized that if he wanted to know God, he needed to find somebody who already knew God and who could show him the way. And so that's the second aspect of his life. The attunement, the acceptance of Master as a guru, as his guru, and the attunement to Master's consciousness. Just last night at a dinner, a beautiful, it was such a lovely evening, thank you. But probably 100 people participated in making it happen. Thank you all. But he said, I don't know whether it was publicly or just quietly at the table, he said, you know, my whole life has been dedicated to only one thing, helping share Master and making his teachings known to the world. So this search for truth that turns into the search for God, and then the finding of the guru that helps that. Now that is not something that's unique to Swami. It kind of resonates with a timeless search. In fact, the very first sentence in the Autobiography of a Yogi is the characteristic features of the Indian culture have long been the search for eternal verities, ultimate verities, and the concomitant guru-disciple relationship. And so what Swami has expressed in this life is what Master expressed as the long tendency, the cultural characteristic, not of India so much, but of the spiritual search of which India is, as Swami has put it, is the guru of the world, because that's where that consciousness of the search for God has vibrated for so many centuries. Now it has also vibrated for many, many centuries in Swamiji. You don't have a great soul that comes into this world, especially one with an enormous world mission that Swami has, that just kind of appears fresh on the scene and scratches his head. Oh, I think maybe I'll go down and uplift to humanity. He's been preparing for this incarnation for many, many incarnations. He had a reading from Brigu that talked about an incarnation that he had back at the time of the Battle of Kurukshetra. So that's, some thousands of years ago. And during that incarnation, it said, he achieved Shanti in his vrittis. Shanti in his vrittis is the classical definition of union with God, or samadhi. That's what Patanjali, that's how he defines when the neutralization of the whirlpools of Chitwa, are those little vrittis. And so way back then, Swamiji had achieved this high state of consciousness. And he's had a number of incarnations since that time. But some of them we know, some we don't know. But they have all been in order to continue this great consciousness of God. But coming back to this life, because this life is what we're honoring this weekend especially. Coming back to this life, so there's this search for God, or the search for truth, that becomes the search for God. Then there's the meeting with the Master, meeting with the Guru, and the deep attunement to the Guru. I want to talk about that a little bit more. Well, I'll mention the third aspect that I'm going to go on to, just keep the suspense from clouding your mind. Swamiji said that after he read the autobiography of the yogi and took virtually the next bus across the country, there were two thoughts uppermost and fundamental in his mind. The first was he had to meet this great soul, and he had to learn from him. And the second was, these teachings are so wonderful. I have to share them with the world. And so it's one of the elemental aspects of Swamiji's consciousness. Remember the astral plane and what it is there and what he's going to, before he comes into this body, what are the fundamental qualities? The search for God, the guru-disciple relationship, and the desire to share and uplift. Those are the three fundamental, basic qualities in Swamiji. And so, coming back now to the guru-disciple relationship, the very first words that Swamiji said to Master is, I want to be your disciple. And as he said, he himself could never imagine being in a position to say those words. He had a great, great soul, comes with great talents. All of the outer accomplishments that he is able to do is because he has refined the tools of his consciousness to be able to do that. So we all know that he has a blazing intellect, a genius intellect, in all the languages he speaks and the things that he can do mentally and the books and concepts and clarity of thought and all of that. But along with that came a little bit in his early life of intellectual pride. And that intellectual pride was not born out of an aberration in his consciousness, as much as a recognition of his soul that he internally knew truths, and all of these professors and teachers and business leaders and so on that he'd been exposed to didn't know half the truth. They didn't know what they were talking about. And so there was this, I think, not so much intellectual pride as rejection. His soul was rejecting what they were saying as being ultimately truthful. But he carried that a little bit with him. And when he came to Master, he said, I could barely imagine coming to someone and saying, I want to be your disciple. And it wasn't until he read the autobiography of a yogi that he came upon someone that his soul resonated with, that knew truth. Now why? Because Master was an expression of the state of consciousness of God, and only God is truth. And so all the other answers that he was seeking were non-answers, and his soul recognized that and rejected it. But when he came to Master, here was God in incarnate form. And so Swamiji was ready then to follow Master. And so Master asked him for his unconditional love, which he gave, asked him for his unconditional obedience, which he did not give immediately. As Master Master also had a little bit of a tussle this way when he met Sri Yukteswar. But Swamiji, desperate to be accepted by Master, still said to him, but sir, what if I think you're wrong? If I give you my unconditional obedience? Because his upbringing, he'd been exposed to a lot of authority figures that he thought were wrong. And here he was in probably the first 5 minutes of his meeting with Master, and there was a little vapor clouds of that, not trusting authority figures entirely. And then Master said, I will never ask of you anything that God does not tell me to ask of you. And then Swamiji said, yes, I give you my unconditional obedience. When earlier on, Dr. Lewis had said that, because Master asked his first disciple in this country, Dr. Lewis, the same questions. When Dr. Lewis said yes, he said, Master rubbed his hands like this, said, good, now I can take charge of your training. And so maybe he didn't do that, but it was the same thing. Good, now I can take charge of you, Walter. and get you prepared for this great mission that you have. And so I would say for me, the most beautiful aspect of Swamiji's consciousness is his deep, deep attunement and discipleship to Master, and the unrelenting offering of that to everyone. Because the Guru, as a formation, as a manifestation of God, is not just a source of teachings. He's a source of the magnetic power of God to draw consciousness in an upward direction, to draw us who will open ourselves, to draw us back to the fundamental realization of our unity with God. But it's the magnetism, it isn't just the teachings. And so that deep, deep, constant discipleship that maintains an openness of mind and heart without reservation to the upward pulling magnetism of God in the form of the Guru, that in itself is a teaching. It's amazing what different kinds of examples of this that I've seen. One time about 2 years ago, we were walking with Swamiji in the garden, and he just kind of stopped and he said, "Oh, that's what he meant." And he was remembering back to an incident where Master said something, and he remembered not only the words, but that Master had raised an eyebrow when he said that. And Swamiji, remembering that some 55 years later, oh, that's what he meant. But how many of us remember back and connect back to those important aspects of our life that happened when we were 20 years old and remember, oh, that's what that meant. Remember, the trees are speaking to us. Everything is speaking to us. God is speaking to us through everything. Most clearly, of course, through the Guru. But God is speaking through everything. And Swamiji keeps tuning into that. A couple of months ago, we were in India with him, and someone said they had just recently visited, I think it was Ranchi that they had visited. And they said, when asked Swami if he had visited, he said, "Oh yes, of course I visited Ranchi." Because Master had been there, this person said, "Well, did you feel Master when you went there?" And Swami kind of paused as if a little bit puzzled. He said, "I feel Master all the time everywhere. So why pick out Ranchi? Why pick out here or there?" He's always with Master, and that constant discipleship. I read a beautiful story a little time ago where I won't tell the story because I'm going to run out of time here, and I've got anxious people behind me. But the end of the story about Anandamoy Ma was someone realizing, well, I'll tell the brief story quickly because it doesn't make sense. Anandamoy Ma was walking and a bird fell down in front of her and was just about to die. She asked a boy to pick it up, and he held up the bird, and it looked into her eyes, and she looked at it lovingly, and then it fluttered its wings and died. And the man with her said, "What happened there?" And she said, "It was longing for darshan." And then the man realized that Anandamoy Ma always was giving darshan. And when I said that to Swami, the story about the bird brought tears to his eyes. But the realization that Anandamoy Ma was always giving darshan, he said, "Well, of course. What else would she be doing?" And so this constant understanding and deepening understanding of the Guru is the fundamental aspect of what drives him. And then the enormous desire to share with others and uplift us into his consciousness. That's what I see as the fundamental soul qualities that have come in. And what a life, what a blessing, and what a great, great blessing for all of us who have touched the hem of such a life.
I always love coming up here and having the opportunity to speak to all of you, so I'm very honored to be standing here. I feel that what Jyotish established is exactly, the right attitude towards Swamiji, and I'll pick it up in the same direction. What we're trying to learn as disciples, as devotees in this life, and being as we are in America now, and Master's mission began in America, and America and India have this destiny together, there's a new expression of ancient teachings that this line of gurus has brought to us. It's the same, but it's different. When Swamiji asked Master if this was a new religion, he responded emphatically, this is a new expression. And so it's something that we have to really think about ourselves. We're fortunate, those of us who were born in the West, that we don't have an old expression that we're working with in terms of these teachings. We are corrupted by Christianity and Judaism to a large extent, but we don't have a corruption of Sanatana Dharma. In India, those who are from there, or born there, or teach there, the problems are different, but they're ultimately exactly the same, which is to extricate us from our wrong preconceptions and bring us into a right understanding. Those of us who are a little older and started with Swamiji a little earlier and lived through the late 60s and the 70s, when these kinds of movements were just all the rage in America, and there were gurus left and right popping up. One so-called teacher, we just laughed ourselves sick, virtually, looking at his resume, which was published as a full-page ad in some magazine, which included all his previous incarnations, all of which, surprise, surprise, were some of the most famous spiritual teachers in all of history. And then here he is now. His name I don't remember, and he has faded into oblivion. That's no surprise either. But there was just this great, if I want to be a guru, it's no problem. I'll just declare that I am. Someone once described the problem in America is it's just like like if somebody came from some African village or some place where they had no exposure to the all-pervasive materialism of America and was watching late-night television and saw, Friendly Fred of the Ford company telling you that you've got to rush down right now and get your Ford from Friendly Fred because today's the day. And that person getting so excited and realizing he thinks he has to rush down to Friendly Fred's and get his Ford, And Americans who are a little more inured to this thing just kind of say, oh, come on, don't be so naive. But what really happened in this country is that anybody who wanted to pretty much could just sail in and declare themselves a guru, and everybody was running around and following them. Jokingly to Swamiji, I said once after we had visited an ashram of a worthy person, but there were hundreds of people all just adoring this individual who, quite frankly, didn't have a fraction of what Swamiji had to offer. And Swamiji was received respectfully, but, nothing like that. I said, sir, if you would just put yourself on in a Rolls Royce, and we could hold a white umbrella over your head all the time and prostrate ourselves and, take the dust of your feet, we could really get this show on the road, And in that same conversation, or that same trip, Swamiji, I started having conversations with him about these things more seriously. And he said to me so sincerely, I have always thought I could do much more for people as a simple, unaffected friend than in any other role. And it wasn't that he said that was the only thing he had to offer, but he thought that was the best way to go at it. And that was in the mid-70s. Things have changed a lot since then as the years have passed. In essence, the the evidence of his consciousness has become more self-evident. Whereas in the 70s and even into the 80s, he did everything he could to keep that evidence from being self-evident. You had to dig for it. But nonetheless, nowhere in this process, even to this day, except in India, where in this sense they understand things a little better, has he ever allowed himself to even stand on the same level with Master. Whereas in the tradition of Sanatana Dharma, generally speaking, a disciple, especially a foremost disciple, takes his place as a master himself. And in India, they just think of him as the guru, because that's how they think about it. But Swamiji is here to bring us a new expression. And his new expression is to help us understand not merely how to sort of seize for ourselves position, but what it really means to be a disciple. I know he visited once in the Berkeley Center. A number of years ago, he went to several of the centers that we had in the Bay Area. And because he was coming to the Berkeley Center, and it was very unusual for him to come, someone had very carefully placed a small picture of him on the altar and put flowers around it. Swami walked into the center and was very gracious in every way, walked right up to the altar and took his picture off. And he just said, "My picture doesn't belong here." And he wasn't trying to hurt anyone's feelings. He said, "It doesn't belong here. Master is an avatar. We are all following him." Now, quite apart from what he has to give us or does not have to give us, we also have to realize that if we're going to follow him, we have to follow him in the way he wants us to follow him, which quite frankly has created a dilemma for many of us. Because on one hand, we are conscious of the consciousness that is flowing through him. And we are conscious of what St. John said in the Bible to all who received him. We are conscious of the necessity to receive when the vibration is in front of us. And we realize that if we block that flow of energy, then we ourselves are going to lose. But if we insist on defining that energy for ourselves, then we ourselves are going to lose. So I've been in this confusing position, for all the years that I've lived at Ananda, because my first meeting with Swamiji, which was in 1969, was him walking into a room. I sensed his consciousness by the grace of God, because believe me, my brain was just, well, I don't even know how to describe it, but nonetheless, something penetrated through the fog when he walked into the room. He had not spoken, not a single word. And I saw his consciousness, and I recognized it as the consciousness I wanted to have. Afterwards he spoke, and I was extremely impressed by what he said, although I remember not a word of it. And I thought, he is also very intelligent and articulate and extremely funny. And I sort of thought, thank you, God, because now my life will be far more entertaining and interesting than it might have been, which of course it has been. But it was the consciousness first. But then had to understand, how are we supposed to relate to him? So let me give you an interesting story that some of you were part of and you remember. A number of years ago when Swami was in India, living in India, so that would have been after 2003. And he had a gallbladder problem, or one of the things, he was in one of his serious health crises. And in the process of, he was going to have an operation, I believe to have his gallbladder removed. In the process of doing tests for that, they discovered a small amount of cancer. Stomach cancer or colon cancer, I don't remember, it's not important. But the whole universe of Ananda was primed and ready to be the prayer support for this operation to remove the gallbladder. All of a sudden we had cancer. Now cancer is no small issue, it's a big word, creates this huge vibration in everyone's mind. So from about maybe 7 in the morning until noon, it was 7 in the morning until noon in California, I don't know what it was around the world, there was this chain of phone calls going around the country, around the planet, about the question of cancer and how we should relate to that. Many people felt that we don't want to activate the fear vibrations, we don't want to activate the negativity, it's not serious, just all, you can imagine all the different things. Question of privacy came up, lots of different points of view. Everybody just wanted to do the right thing, but we didn't know what that right thing was. And And then Swamiji just cut through it all. And what he said quite simply is, I want everyone to know. I want everyone to know. He had to say it several times. And so then the international, thing sort of died down, and the prayer cycle was not just for the gallbladder operation, but now it was for cancer, which caused a certain electricity because we like having him around. And nobody liked the idea of him not being around, so we were all really into it. And because we live all over the world now, we were able to do a 24-hour prayer cycle without anybody having to stay up all night. So a great many people got engaged in some segment of the 24-hour day in which it was your geographic region's responsibility to pray for him. Now, the result of this was so interesting to me, and the result of it I heard later, and I experienced it, and I also heard it later. People sat down in a very serious meditative mood, often with a group of people with energy very focused, and they concentrated the full force of their awareness on Swami Kriyananda. And they had to find him somewhere in the cosmos and then give. And many, many people told me afterwards, in many different words, oh, I see what you've been talking about all these years. Because all the question of how and what to do was removed by the power of love and the desire to give. But the result of both of those forces combined in a moment when we were really working hard to do it was that our consciousness merged with his. And when our consciousness merged with his, all of a sudden, a picture of who this person is, how he lives, what it feels like to be him, and what it would feel like to be like him, became a very common Ananda experience. And I really understood afterwards why Swami said, I want everyone to know. Because later when I told him what many people said to me afterwards, he just sort of smiled. Did that sort of Indian thing where, as he says, it doesn't really mean anything, it just means I exist, you exist, He saw it there. But I understood. He didn't contradict me. Between us, when I present an idea to him, if I'm wrong, he'll tell me so. And he'll correct it. But this one he said yes. Yes, that was so. Because here we are trying to understand a new expression, and what we're trying to understand, and I believe I'm correct in saying that there was a one-word shift in Jyotish's quoting of the first line of the autobiography of a yogi. I believe it doesn't say, Larry, I'm looking right at you. It doesn't say guru-disciple relationship, which is how everyone quotes it. It says disciple-guru relationship. Because until there is a disciple, you see, the guru is fine. It's the disciple aspect of that we have to find first. And Swami Kriyananda has found that. And so here we are, none of us had the opportunity to meet Master in the body. Swami Kriyananda did. Even if he hadn't, it really would hardly matter. St. Paul never knew Jesus. St. Paul had a vision of Jesus after Jesus had died, and all that we call Christianity was actually created by Paul. Because Paul was commissioned. The parallels between Swamiji's life and Paul's life are really impressive. That it was Jesus lived and created the vibration, and then Paul articulated it and made it visible and understandable to the world. And Swamiji has articulated to a stunning degree, and made it visible and understandable to the world, the new expression that Master brought. And above all, what Master brought, not above all, but up there with the list of things, is what it really means to be a disciple. And our attunement with Swamiji, and what we have to receive from him, is how to be a disciple, because that's what he absolutely understands. That's what he was born to share with us. And when we find his consciousness, perfectly, you see, we find our own. And for that reason, we speak of attuning ourselves to Swamiji, and then some people get in this complicated, and less so these days, this complicated relationship between Master and Swamiji. But if you attune yourself as a perfect disciple, you see you have everything. And then the inevitable gratitude to Swamiji also knows no bounds. If you have an aspiration to be an opera singer, if you wish to be a piano player, to be a yoga teacher, whatever you might want in your life, almost always you find somebody who both understands the technique, has the vibration, and lives the consciousness that you want to have. And if you're trying to play the piano, you're going to play Beethoven, or you're going to play Mozart, or you're going to play whatever it is you want to play. But as you're playing it, you're conscious of the fact, I would never be able to play this if my teacher hadn't shown me how to do it. So your reverence is for the music that you're able to express, but how can you separate the two? And how can you be anything less than completely grateful for the one who taught you how to be yourself, truthfully? And many of you, most of you, do not have exactly the same access to Swami Kriyananda in the years of experience. As the years go by, it gets more and more disparate, the different experiences. But I was thinking about Swamiji himself. When he arrived at Mount Washington, it was a well-established group there. There was the souls who had been part of Yogananda's life, part of Master's life, some since they were teenagers. Uma Mata met Master when she was 8 years old. Her father took her to see him. But it took her till she was 13, I think, to persuade her father to let her go live with him. All right? Mrinalini was like 13 when she came. Dayamata was 17. Most of these people are not even living anymore. Uma and Mrinalini are. But they came as teenagers and lived their entire lives with Master. Swamiji shows up. He's 22 years old. He really is a Johnny-come-lately from their point of view. And by the time Swami's 25, Master's gone. It's really by the time Mrinalini was 19, Master was gone. That's also worth mentioning, but that's a different point. But Swamiji's experience with Master was very small by comparison. But that's not how these things are measured. St. Paul never even met Jesus. Swamiji had a particular destiny, and it required a particular karma. At one point, someone said something to me like, well, I'll never feel the way you do about Swamiji because I don't have the life that you've had. And I said, I rarely just think, I always say. If that's true, that means that Swami's entire mission will die as soon as those of us who knew him personally will die. And I said, how could that be true? And then looking at this person, I said, well, your challenge is different, that's all. Because that's what was handed to Swami. How could you know? You weren't here as long as we were. We think that's a self-evidently foolish thing to have said. So be very careful and don't make the same mistake in your life. Because as Jyotish was expressing to us, we're not talking about physical things. And even now, there's a tremendous number of physical things, including audio tapes, videotapes. Nobody dies anymore. They just live on and on like this. But we're talking about consciousness that transcends time and space. And whatever circumstances we were born into, God has given us those circumstances as an opportunity to grow and an opportunity to give. And the limit to that is not set by any conditions. That limit is set entirely by the courage of our heart, the determination of our will, and the degree to which that becomes the guiding obsession of our lives. What do we see in Swami Kriyananda? I have obviously not spent every single day of my life that has overlapped with him, so I can't say absolutely. But to my experience, I have never seen a single day go by in which he does not do something serviceful and something creative. This includes the day before and the day after open heart surgery. You know, this includes being in the hospital, barely able to breathe, and trying to help some poor doctor understand what Dharma is. You know, these are just the smallest examples, and we think, oh, I worked a lot yesterday, today I think I'll just watch videos. You know, the guiding obsession of our lives, if we attune ourselves to Him, will become the same as His. And His are the same as Master's. The open doorway is there, but the relationship is the disciple-guru relationship. The guru is always the same. It's the disciple who determines how that is experienced. God bless you.
It's wonderful to see so many faces of old friends and new friends. It's really, we should take pictures from up here so you can see what a joy it is. When I was thinking of to give this talk, I thought of how to appreciate Swami Kriyananda, and so I've come up with 68 points. But then I thought I should just narrow it down to 9, or maybe 3. When I first met Swami Kriyananda, it was in 1999. I had come to Ananda in 96, and at that time Swami was living in Italy. I was on the East Coast, and so if you wanted to see him, you had to go to Italy. So I was understanding this path, and I was researching it, and I was experiencing it, and so I thought, of part of due diligence, I should go meet the founder, Swami Kriyananda. And so I flew to Italy, and I went there, and I was in the first satsang. He was giving a Saturday satsang, which he hadn't given in a while, because at that time of his health wasn't particularly strong. And so people said, he hasn't been well, and we're not sure if he's going to give the satsang. And then it was announced that he was, and so I was sitting there in the front row, and I expected sort of this quiet entrance from this man who was, at that time, to my mind, advanced in years, and that was 16 years ago, and that he had been ill. I swear it was as if the doors had been blown off their hinges. And he strode up the aisle, and this huge energy just engulfed everything. I was electrified. And then he sat in the chair and said, because there is a Kriya ceremony tonight, let's meditate together. And so I thought, okay, an opportunity to meditate with Swami Kriyananda in the same room. Excellent. I couldn't help it. I just started getting filled with all of this, trying to, right here, sir. And I didn't know if he would open his talk with, I would like to salute our new friend who has just arrived. At the end of the meditation, he strode out, and the whole group basically followed him to his car. And I'm jumping part of the story. In the meditation, I was feeling more and more agitated, more and more just like, not knowing what to do. And then I realized that I was trying to get him to notice me. I was trying to get something from him. And I thought, think of all that he has given me, even if I had never met him, in terms of writings, music, all these wonderful souls at Ananda, the teachers that I had had. And so I thought, let me just thank him. And all of this sort of tension and heat dissolved. I felt this cooling wave, and I just thought, what can I give? I can only give my gratitude. And that giving of gratitude is so important because it completes the cycle of what we receive. And it also continues the cycle in motion. So as I then had said, he walked out of the temple and we followed him to his car. And though I felt a lot of gratitude, I still did kind of and say, Swamiji, I'm Dharmaraj. And I had written a few letters to him, so that made some sense. And he said, oh, you're Dharmaraj. Somehow I thought you'd be taller. But then he added, isn't it funny how we build up impressions of people? And it took me some time before I realized he was saying, let aside your impressions, get to know me. As Master said, get to know me in meditation. And Swami Kriyananda said some years ago, if you want to know me, listen to my music. And again, thank you, David and the choir. It was so beautiful this morning. And so I began to try to get to know him. Then, a little bit later in life, my wife and I, Dharmini, we went to India. And I had always understood my participation in Ananda and with Swami Kriyananda and part of Yogananda's teachings in terms of all the things that we do here. And Ananda stands out rather uniquely in America. I mean, if I open my wallet at the grocery store and they see the picture of Yogananda, they say, oh, is that your mother? And sometimes I say no, and sometimes I say yes. But in India, when people see the wallet, they say, oh, is that your guru? So it was a very different experience living for us in India and having a whole other background, a whole other cultural perspective, as Asha and Jyotish were mentioning. So when I was trying to understand what Ananda is in India and who Swami Kriyananda is and so on, all of the things that I had kind of identified didn't necessarily apply in the following way. I said, well, I have a guru. Well, many people have gurus in India. And well, I'm a part of an ashram. Well, there are many ashrams in India. Well, I practice Kriya Yoga. There's a lot of Kriya Yogas in India too. There's a whole temple dedicated to all different kinds of Kriya Yoga paths. And so I thought, what is it then? And then I met a Swami who was an American-born person who became a Swami and lived in India. And Dharmini and I were visiting him. And he received us, and then we were going to go on a little ride together. And so we got into a car, and we were accustomed to speaking Hindi to the drivers, and so we started to speak to the driver, and he said, no, it's okay, I've got this. And he just said to the driver, Sida jao, which means drive straight. And the driver was saying, well, where are we going? And he said, Sida jao. And I thought, And then he said to us, you have to know how to talk to them. I thought, I beg your pardon. You know, all the half-Indian DNA in me kind of bristled. But and then we had this tour, and I could deal with a lot, but my wife laughs. Okay, so when we got back, he said to me, I'm going to America. Do you know who can fund my trip? And I thought, and he said, what about your friend X? He seems like he has money. I'm going to ask him. And so I thought, And later, Dharmini said to me, Swamiji would never have let us get away with that. Swamiji would never let us get away with that attitude. And I don't say this as a comparison or a criticism of that person, but it really brought out for me that we have been trained. And, I mean, if I hadn't been trained, I might have acted the same way as this gentleman. And I wanted to share a dream with you that I had. I was walking by the room where Swami Kriyananda was staying in this dream, and he was visiting a colony, and he came out, and he was going to give an interview. And he was dressed in his blue robe, and a friend was walking along with him. And Swami said, what I have seen in India is that the Swamis in their orange robes have so much pride. And as he had written in his book, Renunciate Order for the New Age, he said, of what use to them is a renunciation that encourages pride? Because the goal of renunciation is to give up the ego. And so this friend, kind of on the distinction between orange and this blue color, pointed at his blue robe as his own blue robe, as if to say to Swamiji, well, we have to watch out that we also don't become proud of our blue robes, and blue is the new orange, and so on. And so Swami went into the radio interview studio, and as he was going through the door, I called out, Swamiji, if we are not proud, it is only because you have trained us. And I didn't even know if he had heard me, but as the door was closing, he looked at me in the eye and he said, truly. And then I woke up, and coincidentally enough, I looked on my phone messages, and I had a message from Devi asking me to speak this weekend. That training is something we see at Ananda. That is how one of the most distinguishing facets of Ananda in India is, they say, Swami Kriyananda's people are kind and respectful, and they listen to other people, and they tolerate other people's perspectives, and even impositions. And a man even said to Swamiji, I can always tell an Ananda person. And Swami thought, well, but we're a community of eccentrics. How could you possibly identify an Ananda person? He said, because they're kind and respectful, and so on. And Swami thought, oh, okay, well, that's pretty good. A pretty good criterion of uniformity there. But also, another aspect of that training is then how we live. Yogananda said, you cannot win the love of God if you haven't won the love of man. And so it matters how we act in this world, and it matters how we act in each other. But we know that because of what we've seen Swami do himself, and what we've seen the others who he has trained and lived with, how they respond also. We were speaking with Phil Goldberg, who wrote the book American Veda, if you're familiar with it. And he said he has studied a lot of Indian spirituality in America. He himself was a part of a tradition for many, many years. And he said, I think Ananda is one of the healthier communities out of all that I've seen. And he said, that's a credit to Swami Kriyananda. And he said, one reason I think for that is Swami Kriyananda's ability to cultivate people, and also that he's been able to incorporate renunciation along with a householder path, as opposed to a strictly monastic path. That's a very common divide for many groups. And that's one thing that Swami has done, and he very consciously did. This world, he said, needs the examples of married people with children living for God. Whether you are renouncing outwardly or whether you are living inwardly as a renunciate, it only matters if you are living inwardly as a renunciate. Now, I see the time here, so let's see. That was the first half of the first point I wanted. No, I'm kidding. The first 2 points, gratitude and training. And the last point, though, I wanted to mention is that really what moves me most about Swami Kriyananda is not any of his accomplishments, and I feel that that's true for all of us, but still. Because even a perfect expression, a perfect book, a perfect piece of music, a perfect community is still not what he calls us to. He even said, Divine Mother asks of us to build a community for her, but in the sense of communing with her. He is always calling us, as he himself is, to love God more deeply and to become one with God. That is the goal. Whether we play this outward drama of these lovely, all the lovely things that we do and try to share with others, or whether we sit in a cave and meditate, the goal is the same. And his bliss that flows from him is so powerful and so palpable. I was at the dentist of all places yesterday here at the Sierra Family Clinic. And the dentist was talking to me about Ananda and saying, I really like Ananda and so on. And why are you here? Because you live in Los Angeles normally. And I said, well, we're having an event, Swami Kriyananda's 86th birthday. She said, oh, he came here once to get his teeth worked on. She said he was so warm. And she said, there's so much love coming from him, you can really feel that he's one with God. So lessons from the hygienist. Swami Kriyananda was interviewed recently for a magazine in Los Angeles, and I wanted to read to you 2 of his answers. I do live in Los Angeles, obviously. He was asked, do you find that people joining Ananda are different from the way they were 50 years ago? And Swamiji said, yes. They are more earnest in their search for meaning in life. And then he said, then he was asked, what message would you like to leave with our readers? And he said, there is only one purpose in life, to love God. Toward this end, we should love Him in all, serve Him in all, and cooperate always with His will. In living with Swami Kriyananda, we feel that we have lived with Paramhansa Yogananda, and in a very true sense, we have.
To all of the speakers who have gone before me, that's been deeply inspiring. In January, we were in India with Swami, and one afternoon we were having tea, and I noticed on his on his wall, there was a beautiful carved silver plaque, and it was of a Madonna figure and some children. And I asked Swamiji, where did you get that? And he said, oh, we were in Medjugorje, Yugoslavia, a few years ago, and someone gave me that, and it represents the apparition of the Madonna to the children there. And I began thinking, my mind started expanding beyond that, and I thought, how often this has happened in our lifetime, that throughout the world, that the Madonna has appeared to little children, in Gorbandal, Portugal, Fatima, Spain, Lourdes in France, Medjugorje, Guadalupe in Mexico, and it's always the mother appearing to the little children. And I mentioned that to Swami, and he said, yes, that's the sweetest of all relationships, just to see yourself as a divine friend and playmate of God, of the Divine Mother. And he said, of all of Master's poems, that's one of my favorites, Here I Am. And I just you may not be familiar with what this is. It's a beautiful poem, how the lonely soul is wandering, and he tries to find solace from the ocean, but it's this raging ocean. And he tries to find solace from the tree, but the tree doesn't respond, and from other people, and he's always feeling this loneliness. And then finally, this is the conclusion of this poem, Here I Am. Get my glasses on. He says, Master, this is Master saying this beautiful poem. Still there was no answer from the wrathful sea, and only whispers from the friendly tree, just silence from the limitless blue sky, silence from valley low and mountain high. Like a hurt child, within the depths of me, I hid and sulked, no longer seeking thee, when lo, unheralded, some unseen hand suddenly snatched away the all-black band that had blinded me with fold on fold. No longer weary, filled with strength untold, I stood and watched again a laughing sea instead of wrathful roars, a gay, glad world with mystically open doors, with only mists of dreams between. Someone beside me stood unseen and whispered to me cool and clear, "Hello, playmate, I am here." And I just get shivers when I read that poem. And this is what Swamiji has been trying to convey. And the lovely quote that Dharmaraj, read at the very end when Swami was saying to try to express and try to share this divine love and friendship with all. And for my part in this tribute to Swami, I just want to talk about Swamiji as the divine friend, not just to those who have known him. Sometimes I get so tired of saying how long I've known him, because not because of age, but because it creates a barrier between people. And I've seen him give unlimited love to the veriest stranger, someone he's never met. I remember some years ago we were in Paris and he was to give a talk, and it had been poorly publicized and nobody knew about it, and they'd rented this big hall and we all came and we set up. And then Swami came in and he had just flown in from America. He wasn't well, he had a bad flu, and one person came. One man walked in the door, and that was it. And we waited and waited. And finally we said to Swami, just go back to your room in the hotel. We'll deal with this man and we'll talk with him. And he said, no. He came to see me. And he sat down in the front row and he talked with that man who he never saw before or after for an hour about how he met Master, how he changed his life, totally freely given to a stranger. I remember another time we were invited to dinner at a couple's house who we hadn't ever met before. And the man was a success in the world. And his wife had a lot of, was a very accomplished person as well. But the man treated his wife with a lot of disrespect and abrupt and kind of insultingly. And Swami didn't know them, didn't have a continuing relationship, but he felt the energy. And he began praising the wife. What a lovely meal you've cooked. What a beautiful home you've created. What a lovely work you do. How serviceful. He was just changing the energy. And by the end of the evening, that man was relating to his wife in a different way, with respect, with appreciation. And they kept in touch over the years, and it was a different relationship because Swami cared. He could have gone and just had that meal and thought, oh, these people, what a dysfunctional relationship. But no, he saw that these people needed his love and his friendship. Have are strangers to him. How many stories we could tell of the friendship and the love and the support he's given to those who have come to him to be trained, to be shown the path to God. One of my favorites is two friends of mine, a married couple. I was talking with the wife one day, and I just happened to mention, well, Swami called last night. We had some business to convey. And she got a little thoughtful, and she said, Swami's never called us. And then she got even more thoughtful, and she said, no, he did one time. My husband and I had just had a big, big argument, and we weren't speaking to each other. And we went to bed, and we weren't speaking to each other. First thing in the morning, the phone rang, and it was Swamiji. And he said, hello, dear friends. I just wanted to thank you both for your beautiful spirit. And that was it. She said it totally changed the energy. And so this always giving support, encouragement, I can't tell you the number of times, and this is even more important to me than if someone does a great job and he says, you're the greatest in the world and hooray, hooray. but when people have failed, when they have fallen flat on their face, and Swami is there to catch them, not in their triumph, but in their failure. And he's there to say, you can do it. Get up once more. Try once more. And that encouragement, always, always to become who he sees you as. And sometimes we have the unpleasant task of, if he asks us how something's going and maybe it's not going well in a certain area, and we start sharing with him, he cuts us off. I don't want to hear about it. It's not that he's in denial, but he wants to see, he can only see each of us in our highest potential. And this is what he holds up, always, unfailingly. And does that mean we never make mistakes? No.